The Orlando Magic have become the story of the late NBA season and have established themselves as one of the teams with one of the brightest futures in the entire league. And they're such an interesting story as well because they began with the draft. The way they turned all this around was they absolutely nailed 2 lottery picks. First and foremost, they got Franz Wagner a couple of seasons ago in the draft in a pick that I think a lot of people were really surprised the way that this has worked out. Over the last handful of seasons in the league, we've seen teams really start to prioritize skilled size. It's been one of the themes over the last couple of seasons, and when Orlando picked Franz Wagner, most people thought that he would be a complementary option. Nobody really saw him as this perimeter creator, as someone that was going to be potentially a focal point for you offensively. In the lead up to the draft at the time, a lot of people picked him as like a high floor player, potentially going to someone like Golden State. He falls all the way to 8, and Orlando has turned him into this guy that is a creator for them, a facilitator for them, and it's just completely fuels almost everything that they do offensively, obviously him alongside Paolo. And the Paolo part of this is extremely interesting to me as well, because if you go back to the time of the draft when Orlando held the first overall pick, the assumption was it was going to be Jabari Smith. He had, incredible tools defensively, tons of versatility. It seemed like he had the most upside. There was some buzz about Chet Holmgren as well, who of course has been awesome in Oklahoma City. But at the time, the concept behind picking Paolo first overall over the other 2 guys was he is the guy that most looks like a franchise cornerstone player. He might not get there. He might not end up being a great facilitator. He might not end up being a great player. But if any of the 3 guys was going to end up being super high caliber, all NBA, give him the ball and let him create guy, it was going to be Paolo. There's just not as much of a guarantee as some of the other 2 guys. And he has turned into exactly whatever the highest ceiling version of what you thought Paolo might be, that's what he has become already in just his second season in Orlando. And they're a very unconventional team because they are built around 2 bigger wings, both of which can facilitate, one of which is a good shooter, the other is an okay shooter in Paolo. And rather than, some of these up and coming teams we see around the league that are built around high profile guards, guys that are going to run a lot of ball screen stuff, Orlando is built around size and 2 perimeter players with such unique skill sets in Franz and Paolo, and guys that I think there were certainly a lot of question marks about at the time that they were drafted where they were. And there's 2 key pieces in each of these guys' development that have allowed them to get to where they are. For Franz, it's his creation, his ability to get to the rim. He always had, some skills there, but it wasn't as clear in college. He was seen as this guy that could guard and could shoot a little bit, maybe create for you a little bit off of closeouts. But him being able to work in ball screen action, we've seen him in international play as well, really grow and thrive there. And I think that's something that Orlando really prioritized within his development. I think in a redraft right now, Franz certainly goes higher than 8th. And then for Paolo, it's the passing and the facilitating, because in college, he clearly had, he was such a matchup issue in college. He was so much bigger and stronger and faster than everyone else and was so skilled in terms of his on-ball creation, but he had a little bit of tunnel vision in college, and he had some flashy passes, but he wasn't necessarily a willing passer. And now, especially in this season, he has grown so much as a facilitator and a creator, and that is key for his development because it allows him to be not just a scorer, not just someone that you give him the ball in the mid-post and say, hey, go get a bucket, but now you're a feared option. You're a feared weapon of the other team, because if they start to pay too much attention to you, he's able to create all these other angles for all these other guys. Now, of course, it's not just these 2 guys that are powering a team that might end up being a top 6, maybe even a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference by the time the season is over, but also they're an incredibly good defensive team. And I think it starts with that foundation of having bigger players like Franz and Paolo on the floor, but it also has to do with their system. They're pretty good in the paint. They're a great defensive rebounding team. They don't give up second chance points at all. They're one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the entire league. They're top 10 in opponent 3-point percentage, and they force a ton of turnovers. If you're going to beat the Magic, if you're going to score well against them, you have to shoot the ball well, because you're not going to get a ton of opportunities, because you're going to turn the ball over, and you're not going to get second chance points. So if you're going to beat them, if you're going to score 110, 120 points on Orlando, you're going to have to shoot the ball well. You're going to have to get to the rim and finish well. You're going to have to make your free throws, and you're going to have to make your open threes, because they're not going to give you easy ones off offensive rebounds, and they're going to limit your possessions by taking the ball away. And that is partially just because they have length everywhere. I mean, their front court in terms of their 5 spot isn't fantastic, but they just have activity everywhere. Their backcourt, Jalen Suggs, Markelle Fultz, these guys are all over the place. Even someone like Cole Anthony has been better this year. I'm not a huge Cole Anthony guy, but he has been better lately as well. And there is just length and size everywhere. Again, kind of going back to that foundation of having Franz, Wagner, and Paolo Banchero back. And it's just a team that you can tell kind of feels that they are on the rise. It feels like a team that is bought into their roles. It feels like a team that believes in their 2 primary guys in Franz and Paolo, and believes that if they just do their job on a night-to-night basis, and extremely well coached as well, that they're going to be able to win a ton of games. And I'm really, really excited to see kind of how they do in the postseason. Depending on what they do in the postseason, we're going to kind of see what they do in the offseason as well, because this is very much still an imperfect team. They still need a ton more spacing around their 2 primary players. They still need more, complementary options. I'd argue that they're fine in terms of creation, in terms of having guys that can create for other players. Franz and Paolo, that's the foundation, and they just need the pieces around them, specifically at the 5 spot and with floor spacing, to continue to improve. And they're going to have plenty of opportunities to be able to do that in the offseason. They're going to have $25+ million in cap space, depending on what they do. They can get rid of the contract of Jonathan Isaac. It's not guaranteed if they wanted to, but then also Markelle Fultz is a free agent. They could possibly bring him back. They could have between $25 to $40 million in cap space this offseason. That could get them someone like potentially Klay Thompson, who could be available. There's going to be a ton of guys kind of in that $25 to $40 million range that I think would really help Orlando. And if I was them, I would look at 2 things. One, I'd be kind of okay with the Klay thing because he would provide them so much floor spacing depending on how you think he would fit. But I would want spacing. I would want 2-way players, an upgrade at the 5. I don't want like DeMar DeRozan. I don't want another, creator on this team. I want this to be Franz and Paolo running everything, everybody else guarding around them and complementing their skill sets. And I hope that's what they utilize their cap space on this offseason. They also have some future draft picks as well. They have an extra first-round pick in 2025 as well as in 2026. And this offseason is going to be extremely telling of where Orlando thinks that they are. Are they going to go out and try and get another star? Are they going to try and upgrade their guard spots, upgrade the complementary spots, upgrade at the 5? Whatever the case may be, this is a team that with these 2 guys, very unorthodox team that guards really well, has great length, and is built around 2 wings. But this is a team that definitely has a bright future within the Eastern Conference, and I think is definitely ahead of schedule right now with where we thought they would be at the beginning of the season. And I really think that there's a possibility this is a team that wins a round, maybe even 2 rounds in the postseason. They're a really difficult matchup for certain teams, and it's going to depend on how well, obviously, Paolo and Franz play in their first real postseason experience in the NBA, but it's just such an exciting team. It's a team that I've always kind of liked the pieces now for like 2 or 3 years, and it's finally starting to come together under a coach that's doing a really good job, and with a group that has really figured it out this season, figured out their play style, figured out what works for them, and of course is rallied around, primarily those 2 main guys in Paolo and Franz. And even though they definitely have the assets, they have some younger players, some draft picks, some cap space to be able to go out and get, some kind of big star, right? Like if they really, really wanted to try and get Donovan Mitchell or something like that, or if they really wanted to try and get Trae Young, for example, I think is a name that people have thrown around. I'm not really super into that. Even though they have the assets to do it, I hope that they just build around these 2 guys, because I don't think they need anything more in terms of creation than what Paolo and Franz already provide them. And I think anything else that they add to that, I think those guys are that good. I think anything else that they add to that at the guard spot would just be redundant, in my opinion. But the point is, I'm super excited about this team.